Thank you again for your kind invitation for me to come over and spend a few Sundays with you. I appreciate that. I love Tony dearly. He is an awesome Christian man, and it's hard to turn him down when they ask you to do anything. I mean, will you please do this? And he looks at you, down at you. I noticed he had to sit on the stool just to be even with the singers up here today. That was so cool. So thank you for allowing me to come be with you. I appreciate that very much. We're going to be looking at Psalm 15, so if you have a Bible, you can go ahead and turn there, please, the 15th Psalm. Before I do that, let me just start with a couple of little things. When I was a very young man, I remember once going with my mother, who, by the way, tomorrow will be 91 years old. I went with my mother to the farmer's market in Augusta, Georgia. And she went around negotiating for peas and various things. And we paid all cash back in those days. As a matter of fact, I don't know if we even had credit cards back that far. I don't remember. But we were paying cash for everything. And so she paid this lady some money. She handed it to her son, who dug into a little cash box and came back out and shortchanged us by 1 penny. My mother noticed that and said, "It's a penny." And the woman said, absolutely, gave her the penny. And the boy, her son, who had given the money back to us, said, "It's just a penny." To which his mother said, "You know, pennies make dollars." Now, hang on to that just for a minute. Many years later, I was talking to the most successful businessman I'd ever known in my life, a multimillionaire, a good Christian man who had done lots of great and wonderful things in his life. And we were talking about things, and he said, "You know, it's the nickel decisions in business that determine whether you succeed or fail." Now, both of those guys were saying the same thing, the woman and my very wealthy friend. They were saying, you know, people sometimes concentrate on the big picture without realizing that you've got to be faithful in the little things for the big things to work. The things that sometimes you just skip over, that you just don't pay attention to. But those principles are so powerful and so valid that if you don't do them, then nothing else happens as it should, even though it might look like it. So I think sometimes, particularly in our culture, well, the world has changed dramatically since I was born. Now, I'm 66 years old. I was born in 1949. I was born in a farmhouse. I was born in the living room because that's where they moved my mother's bed, because it was February and it was cold, and that's where the fireplace was. So obviously a different world than most of you. Most of you, probably all of you, were born in hospitals somewhere. And having the world change, I mean, I remember my grandparents' house didn't have any, it had internal plumbing only to the kitchen sink. That was it, the only water that came into the house. And therefore, I don't need to go further with this. You understand you have to leave the house to do certain things? Telephones were in existence, but I remember the first telephone that we had was a party line, which was lots of fun because you got to listen to all the neighbors. You knew everything everybody was doing if you learned how to pick that thing up just right. It was just a different world than we live in now. And there were many things about that world that I'm glad do not exist anymore. The racial prejudice, we still have it, but not nearly like it was when I was a child. The prejudice toward women, it's still there, but not nearly like it was when I was a child. I thought it was hilarious that when you announced that the women could play, that Tony leaned over and said that was a recent Supreme Court ruling that women can play in the golf tournament. The world has changed. So let's look at some basic principles here in Psalm 15. I'm not sure which translation the guys are going to put up there. They were kind of going to decide back there. You fellows find it? Okay, if you'll put it up there, I'll see what yours says. I'll go back to the NIV if I like it better. In Psalm 15, beginning of verse 1, Lord, and this, by the way, is a psalm of David. David is writing this, and he starts off with really two questions. Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent? Who may live on your holy mountain? Now, as he asks these two questions, they're not actually two separate questions. They're kind of redundant. And the rest of the psalm, and it's a relatively short psalm, he's going to be giving the answer. Who are these people, the ones that can live with God in his sacred tent on his holy mountain? Who are the people that can do that? And he starts answering this way. The one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from their heart. Now let me stop and explain heart just for a second. Sometimes people get into big religious arguments over the definition or meaning of a particular word in the Hebrew or the Greek. Hebrew makes it the Old Testament, Greek, Greek New Testament. In every language, in every world, it has always been that words don't have specific meanings other than in the context in which they're used. Therefore, different words mean different things in different places. I'll say that different. I'll say that wrong. A word can have different meanings in different contexts. Would you agree or disagree with that? For example, when I speak up north, by the way, the further north I speak, the more southern I talk. because they love it. They just love it. And I accidentally once said the word ain't when I was speaking in Idaho, and they all looked at me like, you dumb Southerner. And I paused and I said, I have offended you Northerners, and I realize you're much smarter than we. But I've been listening to you talk. I said the word ain't, but you say, aren't I? Aren't I? Turn that around. I aren't. That is grammatically incorrect. You should be saying, am I not, right? Am I not? Abbreviate that, A-I-N, apostrophe T. So words can change meaning based on the context. The word heart, as used in the Bible, most often means, notice, I give all that to say that I can't tell you it definitively means this in every place you find it. But the word heart in the Bible most often means the place where that the intellect and the emotions come together. Now, we Americans tend to think of emotions as being in the heart, so therefore we draw hearts and those kinds of things. If you read your New Testament, go back to the King James sometimes and read that translation, which was done back in the 1600s, and you'll find that when it talks about emotions, it doesn't use the word heart. When it talks about emotions, it uses the word bowels. Because you see, in the ancient world, they understood or they viewed that the intelligence was here in your brain, in your head, because that's the part that hurt when you thought too much. But they pictured the emotions as being in the gut. Now, if you think about that, it makes a lot of sense. When you get scared, where do you feel it first? In your gut. When you're really worried, which gets messed up first? Your gut. So they actually saw the intestines, the bowels, as being the center of emotions if they wanted to picture it somewhere. Now, you might be thinking, well, that makes a lot of sense. Why don't we do that? I have a theory. Because it would just look so bad on a Valentine. So when they use the word heart, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it meant the place where the intellect and the emotions met. And so when the Bible talks about you speaking from the heart, it's not just your mind, it's also the way you feel, your emotions involved. If you love God with all your heart, it's in the way that you think, but it's also in the way that you feel. Now, if you picture that, and he's saying, okay, who speaks the truth from the heart, I have a lot easier time controlling my intellect than I have controlling my emotions. What about you? That when I have said things that I wish I had not said, and I'm assuming I'm not the only person here who can look back in his or her life and think, I wish I had shut my mouth. I wish I'd never said that. Very, very rarely has that come from my intellect. Almost always it has come from my emotion, because at the time I was upset, I was angry, whatever else, and my emotions jumped out of my mouth. Anybody ever had that occur? Now look at the next passage. He says this, whose tongue utters no slander. Now if you're thinking, okay, exactly what is slander? Okay, here's the easiest way to find out. Run for office. And you'll discover what slander is. I don't care what your political leanings are. I don't care what your beliefs and values are. I mean, if you're the most liberal or the most conservative, it makes no difference. If you run for office, you're going to be slandered. You say, well, what does slander mean? What does it mean? It means that people take something that's may have a kernel of truth, maybe, but they're going to twist it in such a way that it turns out to be something you didn't say at all, and they're going to use that against you. That's what slander is. I'm going to make you look bad by taking something you did or said and twisting it so that it makes you appear to be this evil, evil person. Anybody here ever had an experience like that? I recall many, many years ago, back when people cared what I thought, a guy was kind of interviewing me. I was standing in a group of people, and he wanted to know what I thought about 2 or 3 theological matters. What do you believe about this and this and this? And I told him. And about a month later, a little publication came out where he said, I interviewed Joe Beam, and he said this, this, and this. And the interesting thing was, all 3 of the things he said I said were the exact contradictions of what I'd actually told him. So I called another guy who'd been in the group, and I said, I just need to know, was I drunk that day? He said, not that I can recall. Well, because my memory in this, and he said, oh, no, he just totally slandered you. Now, think about how it works in our world. I mean, my day job is that we work with marriages, and mostly marriages in crisis. And if one spouse gets upset with the other, do you think any slander ever takes place? Not just to us that they're telling about their spouse, but to their mom, their dad, everybody else. And do you think they always twist it just the right way, or set it up by saying, well, first of all, let me tell you all the things I did wrong, Mom, before I tell you what those terrible things are that my wife is doing? You think they typically set it up that way? Or do you think they slander to their friends, their ministers, their church, their family, and everybody? And you can hear the most outrageous things if you pay attention. And if you don't believe, if you don't agree with the slander, it gets worse. They intensify trying to convince you. I mean, finally to the point where, they'll say, but she's got a demon. Really? Yep. The other night her head went all the way around. Really? When you slander is when you don't tell the truth, because you're trying to slant something in a way that makes you look right and the other person look wrong. Now, sometimes you say, but I don't agree with what the other person says. I understand. But now we're talking about those nickels and pennies. Will you at least represent the person accurately, even if you don't like what he or she thinks or what he or she does? Because you see, if we're going to live by integrity, we're demanded by God. If we're going to be the one who lives in the sacred tent on the holy hill, if we're going to be that person, then we're going to tell the truth when we speak from the heart, and we're not going to slander the other person, even if it somehow makes us look better. And by the way, that little principle creates a whole lot better relationship between everybody, wouldn't you think? That at least I know that whatever you say about me will be true, and that whatever you say to me will be true. Now, you understand that in America we have so many different denominations and so many different people believing different things. And sometimes you do have to take hard stands on what you believe, and I agree with that. But can you imagine how much better cooperation there'd be among just Christians if there was no slander? If people just, for example, one of my friends is a Presbyterian Church America minister. I don't know if you know much about Presbyterian Church, and this is not really about that. It's just an illustration. Part of what he believes is predestination, that things are predestined to occur. Do you at least get that thing? So I had him come over one Wednesday night for a church I was filling in with, and I brought one of the PhDs from Lipscomb University's Bible department, and the three of us, as friends, discussed predestination. And so he would give his view, and then the PhD would answer, and I was kind of the moderator going back and forth, not trying to actually reach a conclusion so much as to show people that, okay, why do people believe what they believe? And when we got to the end of the session, I turned to my Presbyterian friend and said, I'm so happy that God predestined you to be here tonight. We all laughed. He looked at me and said, you've been after me all night long. You remind me of a student that was with me in seminary. One day he said to the professor, well, you just believe what will be, will be. And the professor said, do you mean you believe what will be, won't be? I thought that was a brilliant statement, by the way. We came into the room as friends. We walked out of the room as friends. We walked into the room as brothers and out of the room as brothers, because even though we disagreed, we treat each other with respect. Now think about how that would affect the way you treat your children. Oh, and by the way, if you treat your children to treat you that way, think of how it would work between husband and wife if, all right, we may not agree. I may never like what you're doing, but we're going to live with respect. Now, he goes on. Who does no wrong to a neighbor and cast no slur on others. No, a little more. Who despises a vile person, but honors those who fear the Lord. And here's where I've been headed the whole time, just setting up the text for this. Who keeps an oath even when it hurts and does not change their mind. There's some New Testament passages saying the same thing. You see, Jesus dealt with people in his day who felt that the only way they had to keep their word was based on the value of the thing they swore against. If I make an oath based on this, then I've got to do this. If I make an oath based on that, then I'm more obligated. And Jesus said, I'm telling you to quit making the oaths, not because, by the way, oaths were actually a biblical thing. But he said, what I'm telling you to do instead of the oath is this. When you say yes, it should mean yes. When you say no, it should mean no. In other words, you shouldn't ever look at a person and think, well, but I didn't swear by this, therefore I don't have to keep my word. You should be people of integrity that whatever you say is what you will do. And now we're back to the pennies and the nickels. It has to do with personal integrity, to live up to the right thing and do the right thing no matter what. And does the right thing even when it hurts. And I guarantee you that if you try to do the right thing in your life, in your marriage, and everything else that you do, there will be times when it will hurt. You guys ever heard of a guy named Rubel Shelley by any chance? Rubel's one of my friends who knows something about slander, by the way. Been slandered for decades. I actually said to him one day, I said, I think I'll just go out and start nasty rumors about you. And he said, you're like 30 years too late. Rubel once made a statement to me that I think is absolutely right. He said, Joe, have you ever realized that no person will ever know if he or she truly has integrity until they have to make a decision to do what they know is the right thing to do when nobody else will understand? and when it will cost you dearly. You're not going to be able to explain it. You're not going to have people rally to your side, but you know it's the right thing to do. He said that's when you will discover whether you have integrity or not. Because if you do things for others to see, well, Jesus talked about that. It's got to be who you really are. And that can be tough at times. I remember when I was a young man, I was preaching for a church in LaGrange, Georgia, which was a relatively small southern town. It's bigger now, but really small back then. The bank we used was just off the square, and the city fathers had decided they could somehow make the city better by making everything one-way streets. I don't know why they did that, but they were the city fathers, not I. My take-home pay from the church, and by the way, they gave me my check every Sunday, assuming they got enough in. They gave me the check every Sunday, and my take-home pay was $151.51 for the week. By the way, back in those days, I felt like I was rich. That was a lot of money. And on Mondays, I'd do the same routine. I'd drive up to this little drive-through window at the bank, and of course, it's a small town, so the lady was used to seeing me. Hey, how you doing? Great. And so this particular Monday, here was what I wanted to do. I wanted to deposit $150 and keep out $1.51 for lunch, because back then, you could eat a great lunch for $1.51. You really could. I mean, McDonald's hamburgers were a quarter. So I gave it to her, and she gave it back, and I started to pull out. Of course, another car pulled right in behind me. When I realized as I was about to pull into the street, this is a little too thick. So I opened it up, and sure enough, she had deposited the $150. But rather than giving me $1.51, she'd given me $15.10. Here I go around the block, come all the way back, get back in line, finally get up to her again, and she sees me. What's the matter? I said, well, you messed up. Now, I shouldn't have said it that way because she panicked. So I handed it back to her, and I said, no, give me the right amount this time, okay? And she said, okay. She gave it to me. I smiled. I waited. I started to pull out, and I thought, it's thicker than it was before. I still had a $150 deposit, but now I had $151.10 in cash. I'm thinking, you know what I could buy for $151? And I still got that much in the bank. Just a fleeting thought, and I thought, it's just not. So I pulled back around again. I pull up, and when she saw me this time, she just went pale. She said, what'd I do wrong? And I said, okay, do exactly what I tell you to do. Take all the cash out. Yes, sir. Okay. Now put a dollar bill. Mm-hmm. Put 2 quarters. Mm-hmm. And a penny. Mm-hmm. Hand it back to me. She did. And I pulled away. The next Monday I pulled through. She said, that was the only day last week I balanced. Really. Now, I wish I could tell you that's how I've lived my entire life. That I've always done it just that way, that I've done the right thing no matter what. But I haven't. There have been times in my life when I've done some really bad things in contradiction to my belief and value system. But when I look back on how the bad things finally happened, it didn't happen like a frog gets in the water. It's more like how a cow gets in the water. You know what I'm talking about? If you're walking along kind of evening dusk and something all of a sudden, whoosh, in the water next to you, and you jump because you scared the frog and he jumped in. Now you jump because he scared you. You don't see a cow get in the water like that. You don't see a cow come running in the pasture going, gangway. By the way, if you have a cow like that, I'll buy it. I would love to have a cow who would do that. They just kind of go out and cover their hooves and then out to their, are those elbows or knees? I'm not sure what they are. And then, finally utter things. And they get out there deeper and deeper. You got to listen fast, okay? And that's how we Christians tend to do it. You see, very seldom does a Christian just dive headfirst into sin. Very seldom do our marriages end because all of a sudden we just dive into some terrible thing. Very seldom do we have our problems that come into our lives because we just suddenly decided to turn our backs on God or our backs on what's right or wrong. It's because we waited just a little bit. It was those nickels and dimes. It's when maybe we found ourselves, we were slurring other people. It's okay, I generally give my word, but not every time. I may say different. I generally keep my word, but not every time. It was only an extra $1.51. What difference does it make? I should just keep it. Oh, I see that guy dropped that money, and I could chase him down and give it to him, but hey, he lost it, his loss. And on it goes. And so we start living our life where little things just start not being the way they should be done. And then our children start running the same thing because they're watching us, and they see everything that we do, whether we think they do or not. And they're paying attention like, oh, then it only matters with this and only matters with that. And when you let those those little things begin to slide, not doing the things of integrity on the small. Keeping your word even when it hurts. Not changing your mind. That we wind up in the situation we're in today. Not just in the world, but in the church. Last year or so, some lady came out with a book. She had gone back and looked through some of the research, and she was claiming that our divorce rate in America is not right at 50%. It's actually closer to 25%. And I actually saw people writing articles about it and rejoicing. Yes, wonderful. And I wrote one that made them all mad when I said, does it really matter what the number is? Because the same number of people are getting divorced, whether it's 25 or 50%. It hasn't changed. It didn't drop from 50 to 25. If we miscalculated it, but there's still over 1.1 million divorces in America every year. Figure whatever statistically you want to. There's still over 1.1 million. Here in the state of Tennessee, they're right at 30,000 divorces every year. What percentage of those would you guess are Christians? A large percentage, based on what we see. The people that come to our workshop for marriages in crisis, 94% of them claim Christianity. And we get people who have been in leadership positions. Not just some person who came peripherally, showed up occasionally, sat on the back row, sneaked out early. Not just people who we would look at as saying, well, you weren't really involved anyway. I remember one church elder who told me, you know, God has given me the second chance at the woman I was supposed to marry the first time. Therefore, I'm leaving my wife and my children for the woman that I had dated in high school because that's who God meant for me to marry. Do you think a man who had been an elder in the church, I guess it's possible he could dive off into that, but do you think that he just went there immediately? Or do you think there was some kind of an de-evolutionary process where he changed and changed and changed until he could rationalize that? You think it's possible? Or a Baptist minister of a huge Baptist church. And it's not against any particular branch of Christianity. You understand? Just saying it's across the board. Who told me that, well, I've been fired because I was caught on my church computer looking at pornography. But if you were married to the woman I was married to, you would see it's okay. And the church is being small-minded because that's what I needed because of. And then he slandered and slurred her for a while. Every kind of excuse you can imagine. Every kind of thing. And I have to look at these people and go, I don't think you did that overnight. I don't think you got to that just in a big jump. You quit keeping your word. You actually have changed your mind. You've started doing the little things that begin to eat at your integrity until it was enough of a hole that then the vulnerabilities you have can be taken advantage of. So it kind of goes like this. Nearly everybody has some kind of vulnerability. You understand what I'm saying? Now, it's to your advantage to know what it is. But nearly everybody has some kind of vulnerability. One of my buddies, who was an Assembly of God pastor, huge, thousands and thousands of people in attendance at his church, good man, loved God, loved Jesus, filled with the Holy Spirit. His mother has had 12 husbands. You just can't find a good man. 12 husbands. By the way, he says, do you know how much Father's Day cost me? So here's a little boy, and she divorced one, and she'd look at little Jim and say, okay, Jimmy, you're the man of the house now. And it wouldn't be any time at all until she's married to another. No, you're a little boy. Then she divorced him. Jimmy, you're the man of the house now. It wouldn't be long until she's married to another. Now you're a little boy. You think that can create any confusion within a kid? By the way, what kind of vulnerability you think might exist in a boy like that? Do you think that he would have an inordinate need for feminine approval, for a woman to give him affirmations? Do you think that vulnerability exists? Well, he knows it now. In this huge church, and they had done everything you can imagine. All the offices had glass walls so that you could see anything anybody did. Everybody's computer screen was turned so that while you couldn't read what they were writing, you could see what was on the screen. You understand? They had built in every kind of thing you could imagine, but he didn't understand his vulnerability. So what comes next? Well, possibility You see, vulnerability without possibility, probably you don't have much trouble. If you have the possibility of becoming an alcoholic, but there's absolutely no alcohol anywhere, then it may not happen. You follow? So the possibility occurs, and what he does is he starts hanging out with the worship team some, because they're good people. Now, he's got his big glass office, he's got all these things built in, all these protections, but now he's just hanging out with the worship team. And obviously, this is no attack on worship teams or on pastors. Now, one of the women in the worship team really likes to talk to him, and so they'll wind up standing around for a few minutes afterwards. Well, we can't stay inside because we need to be out where people can see us. And so they walk out into the parking lot, and they'll stand there for an hour or two talking to each other after every worship practice. We have now gone from vulnerability to possibility to probability. Are you following why it's now probability? Because now they're crossing boundaries. They're talking about things they shouldn't have, which finally winds up in reality. And of course, he was caught. He was terminated. His marriage goes into a tailspin. He decides he doesn't want in a marriage anymore. He decides he doesn't want to go to church anymore. It was his wife, Shannon, who fought for the marriage and finally drug him down to one of our workshops. And by the grace of God, not us, but God using us. You understand, it's all God's power. Turned that thing around. They put their marriage back together. And by the way, it was 4 years ago. He's just recently been reordained by the Assemblies of God. He's got his papers, his credentials back. He's now back in ministry with the church that he's helping out that's gone from 300 to 2,000 in 3 years. So I think God's still blessing him, using him. But if you were taught to Jim, and by the way, if he were here, I'd actually get him to get up to tell you the story, and he would. I was speaking to a church of about 6,000 people down in Texas. He had gone with me. And at this point, I said, and so now Jim will tell you the story. And I tossed him the microphone and walked off the stage. First time he addressed a church since all that had happened. So he was very nervous. You see, I don't care how many berries you build. You've got to be faithful in every little thing. And I knew better than to start talking about some of the things I talked to that woman about. It was just at the outset, just conversations. How are you doing? What do you understand? How do you like life? But I knew that I was beginning to lower my boundaries with her and become better friends. And I knew if I would let myself think about it, that at some point it was going to be like talking about things that two people shouldn't be talking about unless they're married to each other. You keep your word even when it hurts. And then this. And then this. You say, but what if I'm in a relationship that's not perfect? Welcome to where all the rest of us are. Nobody is. Nobody is. The only perfect spouses are dead. Then they get remembered as perfect. Oh, he was the most perfect man. Okay. If that's how you want to remember him, that's cool with me. But I used to watch you guys fight. All of us who are alive are imperfect. We mess up. All of us who've been married for any length of time have had times when one of us or both of us have been a jerk, and not or jerkette, and not just for a day, for a week or a month. Am I telling the truth here? And all of us have had times when we thought to each other, Lord, I told you I'd stay in this marriage for life, and I will. So will you just kill her? All right, it's not that bad. Well, some people actually do pray for that, believe it or not. They told me that. You say, well, I just want to be happy. And then people start saying, I'm leaving this marriage. Why? Well, I want to be happy, and God wants me to be happy. And I always ask the same question, where's that verse? What verse? The verse where God says, just do what makes you happy. Show me that verse. Well, you just know God wants me to be happy. No. You see, happiness is based on what's happening. God never promised that. God wants us to be full of joy. Joy is not happiness. Joy is what you feel inside because you know that you're doing the right thing even when you don't want to be there, even when you don't want to do it. The greatest act of love that was ever done in the history of the world was done by a man who didn't want to do it, who was begging and pleading not to do it, sweating blood because he didn't want to do it. But he did it because it was the right thing to do. You keep your word even when it hurts. You do the right thing. And you say, well, we're going to have to work through some issues. Yep. Won't be easy. Quite often it isn't. but you committed to marry each other. That's supposed to be a lifetime thing. Will you keep your word? You see, when they asked Jesus, why did Moses ever give the ability to divorce? You remember his answer? He said, because of the hardness of your hearts. I've never seen any marriage end through a divorce unless at least one of them, if not both of them, had a hard heart. Now, they may have an open heart toward others, but a hard heart toward each other. So you're saying we should stay in there and stick it out and fix it? Yes. You want me to die miserable? Actually, I don't. But I'm telling you that the people who cut and run never solve their problems. Or the people who think it would be so much easier with her, or so much easier with him. And some of the evolution that's taken place in my lifetime in the churches in America, and I don't mean just churches affiliated or at least associated with the churches of Christ, I mean churches across the board, is that when I was a boy, the church would stand strong and say, you need to do what's right. And now it's like, well, you just do whatever makes you happy. And that's getting more and more and more and more. So what's happening to marriages? They're falling apart. Oh, by the way, 50% of all people now live together before they get married. And if they split up, it's not even counted as a divorce. How are we going to change this? I can't change you. I can only change me. And I know that all the bad things that I have done in my life didn't start at the bad thing. They all started here when I quit having integrity. No matter how small. That's what ate me alive. What about you? So in 1984, I divorced Alice. My fault, my sin. I could have told you all the evil things about Alice. They weren't real, but I had made them real in my mind. Can you understand what I mean by that? I divorced Alice. 3 years later, when I finally came to my senses, oh, by the way, divorcing Alice was not the end of my debauchery. It just was when it got kicked into higher gear. So the 3 years of living a very godless lifestyle after that, extremely godless lifestyle after that. Finally, gradually finding my way back to God and then calling Alice and saying, would you possibly consider taking me back? And we've been divorced 3 years. And she asked all of her friends and all of her family and all of her good church friends, and without exception, every single one of them, without exception, every one of them said, no. You'll never be able to trust him again. And so they counseled and I prayed and I outprayed them. So she married me the second time. We still had our problems we had to fix. We had to work through a lot of stuff because I'd been in a lot of stuff that was not good. Plus, we still had the problems from the first marriage that nobody had ever resolved. So it took some time to figure it all out and work it out. And I can honestly say without any reservation that Alice is my best friend, that Alice is the woman I love with all my heart, that I'm looking forward to getting very, very old with her. So we'll be sitting out on the front porch, about evening time looking at the sun go down, and she'll come out and put a sweater on me. And I'll say, honey, are we going someplace or am I just cold? So 3 or 4 years ago, we don't give regular Christmas presents to each other anymore. It's just like, why build up all this debt to give people things why not do things that are more personal? And so when we give gifts, it's more with something we actually do in some fashion. So a few years ago, I thought until I finally came up with a statement. Then I had it printed on very nice paper and then had it framed with matted frame. And I gave one to each of my daughters, including my mentally handicapped daughter, who keeps it on her dresser. Even though she doesn't know what it means, she knows it's important, and she's got it right on that dresser. And the other 2 daughters have it. And this is what it says. Integrity is the willingness to give up anyone and anything for this one rare jewel. To know within, I did what was right. What do you think that means to my daughters? You think it's just a pretty statement on a wall? Or do you think when they look at that, they go, from our Father, we have seen the results of when you live without integrity, when you don't do what you say you're going to do, when you change your mind and go do something else. And now we have also learned from my father what happens when you come back and do the right thing, even when it hurts. The good days, the bad days, whatever days that you stay in there. What do you think that would mean to my children? No, obviously, I'm not the example here because I messed it all up. So what about you? If you're going to have a good marriage, good relationship with your children, good relationships in life, a great church, then it all is about integrity. Doing the right thing. Paying attention to the pennies and the nickels. Even when you don't want to. Even when your emotions scream for you to do something else. You do the right thing, even when it hurts.